In this video, I tell you about an upcoming campaign on my mini factory called Old Liberis. But before we get into that, I want to give a quick shout out to all of my Patreon supporters and tell you about Bob's picks for last month's GGGGs. Each month, Bob the Beholder picks some of my Patreon supporters to receive gratitude gifts. And for this past month of November of 2022, these Patreon supporters were chosen to receive credits and dice boxes from 3D Egos. It's Nam T, Mark C, Leaf B, and Terrell S. Simon C received the All-In Talisman Saber Terrain Kickstarter. CP Cat received the All-In Pledge for the Beam Down Kickstarter. And Jared S received the $100 to go towards last month's Crowdfunder pick. For this month of December of 2022, this printed and painted ruined chapel from this campaign is going to be shipped to one of my Patreon supporters. Also, some pledges from the campaign will be available as well. Also, we have a $50 credit from Terrainify. Make sure to check out my previous video showcasing them. We're also going to have a laser and a couple other items that are added to the list. So use the link below to go to my Patreon page to check out what the rest of the GGGGs are. So I've done a number of videos for Matthew of DecoQuest. He has produced a couple of campaigns, mostly on Kickstarter, but this time it's going to be on my mini factory. I think he's experimenting with frontiers and all of that setup. I have pledged on other campaigns in my mini factory. Pretty much it seems like an easier platform to be able to run a campaign, especially if you are giving away STL files. So use the link below to sign up to be alerted once the campaign goes live on December 12th. It's going to last through January 5th. Once the campaign launches, I will update the link so that it takes you directly into the campaign. If you sign up, you are going to get promo codes as well as a free STL to print out a stump, so you can check out how these STL files print out. But I've always found Matthew's design really detailed, and in fact, I think the pictures he has for the campaign, he has printed out on his resin printer. I always find that terrain is more cost effective just to print out an FDM because I don't necessarily care about that much detail on tabletop terrain. But each to their own, at least you can see that there is a high level of detail that Matthew always puts in. In fact, the files tend to be fairly large compared to other STLs just because there's so much detail that he puts textures into his models. And that was the case with previous campaigns like the tower or the bridge that were previous GGGGs. And this time I did print out this ruined chapel, and sure enough, it has plenty of detail. I always have a lot of fun painting them because of the level of detail that's found on these models. And if I were to have any critique or complaint about it, is that oftentimes Matthew puts these spikes onto his buildings, and where they attach is really thin. And because I print my models out at 0.2 millimeter height, with only 5% infill, just to save on the amount of filament that I'm using. Sometimes that connection point is relatively weak, and sure enough here, I broke off one of the spikes. So if there's any way, Matthew, if you can strengthen up the connections a little bit more and make it a little thicker, I would appreciate that. But really, that is the only complaint. All of these pieces, these are multi-piece prints, so they're maximized for printing out without the need of any supports, and also being able to use the interiors of these buildings as well. And I really like the fact that they are ruins because, like I've said in so many of my other videos, I do prefer ruins just because you have some line of sight and ease of access into the buildings when you're playing your favorite RPG or tabletop war game. So definitely check out the pre-launch page and you can get a sampling of the models that he's intending to include in this campaign. But also take a look at some of his previous models too, because you can build out a whole castle wall if you want to. He has a lot of variety. Since I can't walk you through the campaign with all the details or options, I do have a painting tutorial about how I painted this up. If you've seen any of my other painting tutorial videos, I pretty much am following the very same method. So if you're familiar with that, you don't necessarily have to watch this because you'll know exactly what I'm doing. But for those of you who might be newer to my channel, this might be a good entry point into seeing how I paint all of my buildings really quickly using just craft paints, so you're saving a lot of money. So if you're not interested in the painting tutorial, I will sign off here. Again, please like the video and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, check out the merch that I have available below this video. Might make good gifts for your favorite gamer for this holiday season. Otherwise, happy printing, happy gaming. We'll see you next time. As always, I spray paint primer on it with this ultra flat Krylon camouflage brown, or any really matte dark brown is going to work. And one of the things is I've already broken one of these pieces. So these pieces are super thin, so you have to be careful. I'm just going to tear it off and just have it be this way. But you got to be really careful with these. I mean, they're really thin, and I always manage to break one of them off at least. But it doesn't really matter because these are ruins, right? So it doesn't matter if pieces get broken off. And even though the stone, you know, could be gray, actually you can't really tell a big difference between the dark gray and the dark brown. So I just spray paint everything dark brown. Starting off with some zinc or dark gray, using a flat hog's hair brush that is stiff. I like the stiffness of these brushes because it doesn't get into the crevices and you're pretty much just wanting to get a good base coat but still maintaining the dark recesses of the brown. And so wherever you see any stone, this is where you want to brush this on. And at this point, because this is the first coat that's going on, you don't really care if it gets on the other pieces because we're going to be painting over it. So just trying to focus in on getting it on all of the stone. So now I'm actually going to grab some slate gray and mix it with the zinc just to get a medium gray because one is too dark and one is too light. So when I mix it together, I'm sure that there is a paint that actually is this medium color, but it's not that big a deal to mix. And I just want a little bit lighter. So I just eyeball it, right? You don't want your brush to be as wet. And in this case, whereas before I was dragging and painting all direction, this time I'm just pulling down. So it's just catching the tops of the stone, like so. See how that works? And I'm not putting as much of this shade of gray because I'm just highlighting, right? So that's all you're trying to do here. And you can adjust according to how bright you want it to be. And for these areas right in here, I sort of want this, whatever spackling that might be, or mortar in between the stones, I sort of want that to remain brownish, and that's why I didn't go as deep into those areas. So this is a pretty quick and simple step just to do this highlight. Don't forget to do the insides as well. And see how quickly I'm doing this? I'm just barely touching these spots. Do the floor too. So very easy to do this. Now I'm grabbing some milk chocolate and getting a smaller brush because I need to be more selective with where this goes on, because there isn't a ton of wood here. So the reason why I grabbed the smaller brush is because I don't want to get it onto the stone. So don't want to undo all of the work that I just did. So just being careful here. Keeping it off the stone. You know, it can't be perfect, so every once in a while I'll go back with the gray just to go over the spots that I inadvertently covered up with some brown. And in this model, there isn't a ton of wood, like I mentioned in these sections. See, look. See, I got some right here. So I'll go back just with the smaller brush and do some touch-up work. Or sometimes it's so small it doesn't really even matter to do even touch-up work. And sometimes with milk chocolate, you got to do 2 coats against a super dark undercoating. So just be prepared to do that. But not a ton of wood on these pieces here. Now definitely on the roof parts there are. And here, you know, because these are ruins, showing through some of these cracks. So that will generally work. And some pieces in there, like so. And then obviously this piece, this roof piece, has a ton of wood. See all this stuff inside, so I'll spend the bulk of the time with this piece. Now I'm going to use some honey brown just as the lighter shade for all of the wood. And here I'm just more selective, only doing a little bit here and there. You don't have to do it across all of the wood. Just highlighting some spots. For the roof, we're going to go with one of my all-time favorites, Georgia clay. I know it looks like these are metal roofs, so I'm not entirely sure, but because they have rivets and things like that, so I am just going to color all of these metal parts with this color. I might go back and maybe choose a different color for the metal, like these spikes and stuff, with copper, possibly. But I'll need to grab a smaller brush and do all of the edges, because I don't want to, for example, this section here, I don't want to get it onto the wood, so I have to be really careful. So there isn't enough paint on there, so I'm going to use one of my smaller brushes to get into some of those details. But until then, you know, I just use this brush, and I can even see here I missed some of the wood, so I'll have to go back and paint that brown. But that's not a big deal. You know, as you're painting this terrain, oftentimes, or even miniatures, you'll realize that you failed to paint apart something. So it's not that big a deal to go back and go over it again. And even here you can see that my coverage with this color isn't that great, so oftentimes I'll do a second coat just to brighten it up a little bit. But in cases where this is a ruin, you might want to keep the paint colors dulled down a little bit, just because colors will be more muted with ruins than they would with brand new buildings. Entirely up to you though what kind of style you're going for. So just do that for all of the roof pieces. I'm grabbing me some forest green, or any dark green is going to work. And I'm also switching out my brush to use a regular sable brush and keeping it fairly wet so that the green can flow easily, because there's a lot of texture, and to cover these thorns you need to keep your brush relatively wet. And this is going to be the base coat for all of the vines that are here. And you know, in real life, I think thorny vines are more brown, dark brown, so you can keep it dark brown, but I just wanted these to stand out more. That's why I picked a green color instead of keeping it brown, because I feel like there's plenty of brown with the wood. That's part of the structure, so just to give it a little bit more of a color that sticks out, shows something different or something else. And Just put a base coat of this all the way around, just being careful not to get any of it onto any of the parts that we have already painted. The roof line, any of the wood or stone or anything like that. There's quite a bit of iron, so this is going to take you some time. But just go carefully and you should be able to get some good coverage like this. If you don't completely get everything covered up, that's okay, because we're going to go over it with a highlight color and you'll be able to cover that up as well. I'm grabbing the festive green or any other lighter green. I mean, this is sort of a standard green. And using the same brush, instead of coloring all of it, I'm sort of just highlighting the upper portions where the light would be hitting the thorns as well. And again, this just gives it a little bit more depth to highlight this way and put a second lighter coat on, just like we did with the wood. So I'm not bothering to be super precise or careful, but just as long as you're highlighting the parts that you want, that's what you're going for. Now I'm going to go through the process of just rusting up some of the metal. It's just the windows and some rings. I'm going to do the roof spikes a different color, but if you want to rust things up, this is the three colors that I would grab. Sort of a dark brown, and then this Georgia clay that we did the roof with, and then some orange.
Dramatic increase since what you're now, and plastics, etc., all those sorts of things.
Now I'm just taking some black and filling in all of the nail heads. You could, choose to make these rusted as well and using the brown and the oranges, but I don't know, for some reason I always do nail heads in black. And then I'm going to use this metallic copper just because I want to do the rest of the metal in copper, but you can choose silver or gold. And definitely this cross up at the top. And I can tell already I might need to do 2 coats of this just because metallics sometimes aren't thick enough, or at least the cheap craft paint version. If you use miniature paints, you can usually do it in 1 coat. I'm trying to keep some of the brown, dark brown as shading still present, because if I covered up the whole thing, it wouldn't look quite as aged. So I'm just selective with where the paint is going on and leaving some of the dark brown to remain as shading. I sort of like that. So that I think looks pretty cool. All of these spikes in this color too. And the reason why I sort of like the copper color is it is really close to the color of this roof. It isn't like super different from it. In fact, you might mistake it as being that color too. So that's sort of why I like this color. But you might want to differentiate it a little bit more. So silver or gold could look good on here as well. I'm going to be grabbing some purple because there is some mushrooms right here growing in the roof, which I think is awesome. This attic actually just goes to show how damp and run down this ruin is. So that's just a cool little detail, and you can use any other color, blue, red. You can even mix it up and paint all of these mushrooms different colors, but for speed's sake, I'm just painting all of them purple. And I just thought, so far I haven't used this color at all on this building, so just again having variety and different colors in here, I think looks really cool. And while I'm waiting for that purple to dry, I actually got some white, and I'm going to combine it with this brown that I used earlier, just to get a light beige. And then once this purple completely dries out, I'm just going to tap all of those bumps white.